Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let's start with a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for tonight. And thank you for this time that we have together. Thank you for keeping us all safe. Thank you for the weather that we have, even though we'd like it to be a little bit warmer, but we'll take it for right now. And just help us learn what you want us to learn out of the message tonight and the discussion we're about to have. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're in week 2 of our series on Hebrews 11. Tonight we're covering verses 4 through 6. The biggest takeaway I want you to focus on with the video tonight is Ephraim actually talks about the story of how he was called into ministry. So it's a really good story, and we'll discuss a little bit more after that. So I'm going to run back and start the video, and we'll be good to go.
These next verses move from what it means to have faith to how to live faith. And the examples that are used indicate that this life is not the end of the story, that we live our lives on an eternal timeline. And Abel is mentioned, who had a very short life, but it says by faith he still speaks, even though he's dead. And Enoch is mentioned, who was taken from this life right into God's presence. So there's this indication that our life is longer than just what we live. And when we come to faith, we become part of this bigger, longer story. And I would love to hear how you came to faith.
I grew up in a poor family of 11 children in an island located in the western part of Port-au-Prince called Lagunave. My first experience with God started when I was 9 years old. I recall that I worked in a garden, a little garden nearby my house. And I've heard a choir singing one of the most beautiful hymns. I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me.
And it was in a church nearby?
No, there's no church. I have just...
You heard it in your mind.
I've heard that. And since I grew up in a Christian family, I knew that song and I started to sing it in Creole. But what impacted me is when I've heard a voice whispering to my ears, saying that Ephraim, from now on, I've chosen you to be a pastor.
So you heard a voice whispering,
yes,
saying that you had been chosen to be a pastor.
I've heard that voice talking to me, whispering to my ears, and I run to my house. And I met my mom and I explained her what happened. I tell her the story, but she didn't just listen to me.
She said, you're just a little kid.
My older brother, he had the ears of my parents, and he said, he tell the truth. So I had a dream about him last night that I kept silence.
So your brother had a dream.
My brother had a dream, and he kept that dream. But since I tell the story, he said, now I will explain.
So he never told anybody about it. But after he heard you.
That's right. He said, I've seen Ephraim with his guitar. Since 9 years old, I started to play the guitar. He said, I've seen him with his guitar on the cloud.
In the cloud?
In the cloud, in space. I've seen him with his guitar in one hand and a rope in the other hand. And he had the power to raise people from the ground simply by extending the rope to those people.
So you had a guitar and a rope, that you were reaching people up.
That's right.
And your brother had that dream.
That dream. He said, that dream told me something. I just didn't want to tell it to anybody.
It probably seemed
would-
crazy to him.
That's why. But since he have heard my story, he said, "It is true. You are called by God."
Wow.
And now my parents trust me.
And so what happened after that?
We were 11, and 3 of us were ready to start secondary school. But at that time, there was no secondary school on the island. So after grade 6, you had 2 choices: stay on the island, or you go to Port-au-Prince, the capital for secondary school.
So from the country to the city.
That was a big challenge as a country boy to move to Port-au-Prince without my parents to take care of me. That was very difficult, and we were 3 of us. And believe me, my friend, 2 years after, my 2 siblings decided to quit.
It was too difficult.
Too difficult, and they returned to the island. I also wanted to return to the island, but I remember my brother told me, "Remember, you had a dream. I also had a dream. You said you wanted to be a pastor. God called you to be a pastor, and I believe God called you. But remember, you cannot be a good pastor without an education. You need to stay in school no matter what." And I decided to stay.
And
It
you
was
stayed.
very challenging
Yes.
for me.
There were days
I
when you
stayed.
didn't have food. I remember you told me.
Yes, I sometimes stayed 3 days
Wow.
without food. I was only 12.
And you had
Yes.
one outfit too.
That's why people like me, being raised in a family of 11, my family was poor. I had only 1 pair of pants, 1 pair of shoes, and 1 shirt for the whole year. That's all we had. And, whenever my parents give me a new clothes, I was very excited. And I used the old one to wear every day, and I wear the new one to go to church. That was the way it is.
Wow.
My early life, I was like that.
But the courage that you had to stay was because of the calling you had in your life.
That's right.
And that's what these verses are talking about. They're talking about living by faith, saying without faith, it's impossible to please God because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and rewards those who earnestly seek him. It really means that we give him our lives and we say, my life is yours. And certainly you did that.
That's right. Every time I look at my early life, I recall Joseph's story, who've been through difficult time.
Yeah.
Is part of your journey to success.
That's right. And you certainly found that later. You discovered that life was more than just your little life, that it was bigger than that,
That's right.
and that you had a story to live. That was God's story. And I think that that's what these verses are talking about, that we live the story that we have, but we know that it is not over when we leave this earth, that our life is on this eternal timeline. And what we do is going to impact other people. And certainly that was true for you. I believe that that's why God called you, because of all of the things that you have done in people's lives, including mine.
All right. Anyone have their Bible or Bible app handy if they want to read Hebrews 11, 4 through 6? Okay.
By faith, Abel offered to God better sacrifice than Cain. By this he was approved as a righteous man, because God approved his gift. And even though he is dead, he still speaks the truth. By faith, Enoch was taken away, so that he did not experience death, and he was not to be found, because God took him away. For prior to his transformation, he was approved, having pleased God.
So, two people, two vastly different ranges of their life. You look at Abel, very short life, was killed by his brother. Enoch lived 365 years. So he had a full life and then was just taken. So kind of with those two, kind of a look at kind of that life on an eternal timeline where Abel had a very short life, but it still lived on. And even Enoch, who had a long life, is still living on as well. So anyone have any thoughts about Ephraim's story from the video?
Kind of what he read there, he said, you got to realize he's true, or God's alive, God's real, God's real.
Yep,
And he said that in the church.
absolutely.
Interesting that people can have visions for you and you not realize it, until they speak it to you, but other people see where you're heading and you don't see it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was my favorite part of the story was his brother had that dream and held it until Ephraim actually mentioned something. The first question that for discussion is, what, if ever, were you first aware that your life was part of a bigger story that was eternal?
I think when I fell and found God, I didn't think that I was down.
No, absolutely. I think to me, at first, I didn't see how big of a story it actually is. And then as I started to move along on my walk, I'm like, oh, this is a lot bigger than I ever thought it could be.
But you're not going anywhere till you step on.
Mm-hmm.
Believe, you know, but you got to take that step on and go for the ride.
Kind of like Ephraim last week when he talked about his daughter jumping out of her crib into his arms because she just took that leap of faith that dad was going to catch me.
I think when I lost a grandparent, my grandfather, my grandmother, I realized that I was 12 when I lost my grandfather. That's when I dedicated my life to Christ. Then as a teenager, I realized that there was more than, just the little life I had on earth with my family. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I talked about it in church all the time, but until that became a reality, and you actually have to believe something that's waiting for you in heaven, it, when perspective kind of changed.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of have to have that moment where like, oh, it is real.
I think
You hear of other people passing away. You didn't ever think that would happen to your family.
Mm-hmm.
So once my first grandfather passed, it's like, wow, he's up there. So every day that I got up, I knew he was going. But yeah, you don't think that'll ever happen in your.
Candy?
I would have to say, Jonathan, kind of Kristen, as long as I can remember, like Jesus, when I was 17, I was friends, but we had a hard time conceiving him. And then on the day of his birth, his heart rate went up to 300 beats a minute in labor. And we almost lost him in cold sleep. I don't. How can you fathom that? You know, your life tied into the lives of your kids, and ultimately, you have a huge play in even how their faith turns out.
Mm-hmm.
all those good things waiting upstairs.
Oh yeah.
And I really did. I didn't think about it after I said that. That was what popped in my mind. The escalators. And it's like, yeah, because there's all those good things waiting for me up there. But I got to get on. You got to go. You got to get on, go for the ride.
Absolutely. That's
All the good stuff is upstairs.
it's where the all
Downstairs.
it's where all the archery stuff's at is upstairs. Oh, the Katie store's up there. I forgot about that. But no, you're right. I also remember there's a mall I used to go to that up on the escalator, right when you turned right from the escalator, there was a big pizza place. And at the time, you could get like slices for $1. And boy, I'd load up on those things. The next question is, have you ever experienced a calling like Ephraim did in his story? So, have you ever had a calling like Ephraim described in his story, where God spoke to you to say, "This is what I want you to do"?
So I was in college. Been in criminal justice all the time. When I realized I wasn't ready for it, and trying to figure out what I was going to do. I got it into my head. We got some. Go somewhere else, start. A friend of mine that I was working with at the time mentioned to go to his church. Never been. Didn't want to. I went to the church with him, and this random lady I'd never met walked straight up. I have something I'm supposed to tell you. Saw me standing in the arm, waiting to fight, like ready to fight, like just prepared.
Yeah.
Pretty strange. And she says, I'm also supposed to tell you this story.
A word that not a lot of people want to hear is wait.
Most of it, wait. So, yeah, put that plan out of my head, and it wasn't terribly long after that. It was kind of starting to fall in place. Going into the Marines, and then life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, kind of with me. I mean, most of you know my story, but I mean, I started coming here, and then God spoke to me saying, "I want you to do ministry." Well, didn't say anything else, so keep going along. And then it was one day I read something. It's like, "Well, that's good. Now I want you to be able to teach it." Now I'm doing this. The biggest thing, though, a couple days ago, I was given this vision of me speaking to students, athletes, about answering the question of, can you be competitive and be Christ-like at the same time? Didn't know what that meant. And it was funny because I had talked to Pastor Steve a couple months ago about sports ministry, but I didn't know what it looked like. He got me in touch with someone to where I might actually be helping out in sports ministry soon. So it's amazing how that sort of thing works, where you just get that, either that vision or that clear-cut voice, and it just works from there.
You know, to be okay to be competitive and be a Christian, because so many Christian colleges have
Mm-hmm.
sports. We see the Evangel College, Springfield. Some guy come down and play basketball. We primarily go to basketball. We go to a few football, but Gainesville, all kinds of colleges we see. Christian colleges come down and play, with William Penn. So yeah, some of them are very competitive, particularly Kendall and Lyle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not just the players who get invited there on scholarship,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe aren't
it brings out the worst in people. I would definitely. What I've come to find out is, like, I've always been competitive my whole life, and then I was told it was wrong. So I've spent the better part of probably the last 7 years running away from it. And then I finally realized there's a right and a wrong way to do it. And that's just a part of who I am. God gave that to me for a reason, and I was running away from it. So now I'm leaning into it and kind of going from there. Anyone else have any stories of God giving them their calling or God pushing you in a certain direction?
Mine was always me. It was like from an early church, from an early age, always involved with me for church.
Hmm.
I think back how long it's been, but a little nudging in my brain that I need to do more. And I'm thinking, God, I can't go to Haiti. God, I can't go to South Africa. God, I can't go there. God, I can't go there. In the meantime, Vital Ministries keeps pushing in the area, and they keep sending leaders to Knoxville, and keep sending leaders. Pretty soon Mike calls up and says, I ain't got anybody. You're it. And so, basically the Lord pulled the rug out. Said, you got to quit pushing it away. You got to accept what I'm, it's like Job, accept what I'm giving you.
Yeah, exactly. We fight it as hard as we can, but eventually, just we either we're not or go all in with it.
I think about that, what you just said. A lot of you know my story with music, and I won't go into all that right now, but, my walking away from it, like I was going to make a difference doing that. But had I not come back to it, I wouldn't have probably discovered that Hannah, like most recently discovered that Hannah is a beautiful singer, and she has so much potential. Had I not said yes again to taking back the gift that God wanted me to keep in first place, I don't know what that would be. We're doing our first concert, community choir club all together on Friday, and she's so excited. I'm terrified, and this is my second one. The more we, if we fight things, we are holding up other people. And that scares me. And I'm glad I listened.
So Ephraim talked about the challenges he faced as a young kid, as part of how God was preparing him for his ministry. Have you ever had any connection like that with your calling, where you've had some rough times and you see it as a way that God's preparing you for that? I know with me going through everything that I went through to kind of get to where I was at was preparing me for eventually what I was going to end up doing. I guess it's just one of those things where you're going down that road and you get knocked down and you pick yourself back up and dust yourself off and keep going. It's hard to, at first it was hard for me to understand that all of it meant something, because you think something bad happens to you, your first thought is, well, what did I do wrong? And then you realize you didn't do anything wrong. It's just unnecessary. Yeah, exactly.
Spot out fast.
The hard way.
So, but we all have starvation moments in our journey.
Mm-hmm.
We all have those hungry moments. And it's there to teach us. It's there to strengthen us.
Humble us too. Which is the tough part about it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's rough for him to have to move away from his family. Yeah, going 3 days without eating and only had one outfit to wear to school. So that had to have been tough. And then when his brothers decided to go back, then he was really left there by himself. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Just if you've had any experiences like Ephraim did, that some troubles you had prepare you for what your calling eventually is.
Dirt. I don't understand why. I don't get it. It makes me mad. It's not at God, of course, but just the whole dang thing ticked me off. Things did not go well at all. And now we're all free going into life. And I have to believe that either for myself or for my kids, there's a reason for all this stupid mess. Because if not, why are we walking through it? God doesn't waste any moment. Not a single one. No matter how hard that is. So I guess I'm just kind of excited to see what that is.
So, what stood out to you about Ephraim's story? Especially the part where going to school despite of the hardships, and have you ever been motivated to do something hard or challenging because you felt called? It's really interesting how a lot of this is matching up with what's been going on with me the last couple of weeks. I guess with me doing something hard or challenging, I'm singing on Easter Sunday, and that's something I haven't done since I was in elementary school. So talk about hard and challenging. I'm jumping right in the deep end with no life vest for that one. So you might want to bring some earplugs because it might not be good. Yes. No. I'm singing Man on the Middle Cross by Rhett Walker. So anyone have any thoughts on that? If you want to go for that, we can. All right. Well, it'll be on Facebook. You can watch it later. That way you could mute it and have closed caption on it. That might be the best way to. Yeah, exactly. That might be the best way to listen to it.
Band we heard the other night, they all had auto-tune mics. You get an auto-tune mic.
Oh, that would be perfect. But
It would be perfect, yes. It can't be unperfect with auto-tune.
yeah, exactly. So besides me singing, does anyone have any thoughts on what stood out about Ephraim's story? As I'll guide us back on on course here. Or not only what stood out to you, but in what way does his story inspire you?
He had no doubt, did he?
No.
Well, his brother encouraged him and said, I had that dream, you have a dream, you need to stay at school.
Mm-hmm.
God's calling you to be a pastor. You can't be a pastor if you're uneducated. You need to stay at school, stay where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we need that someone to push us along. I mean, I've learned a lot from all of you. I mean, a lot of you have all helped push me along that path because there's been a lot of times where I've wanted to give up. May not seem like it, but every one of you has had a little part in all of this. And then also, kind of all tying into this, does his story make you look at your own hardships differently?
In the moment, it's hard to see that it's God testing you, that it's God building you up. In the moment, it's just painful. It's easier to look back and see that than it is living through it.
Yep.
Well, we think we got, it's all like goals too, but he was on his trip. We've got it pretty good over here, don't we?
Very fun.
For me, going to Florida, it's kind of unreal what is out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of fun.
And I think that goes back to last week. Something Lori said was we don't really sometimes appreciate all the stuff that we have or resources we have here. Especially when you look at a situation like Ephraim, 11 kids in that family. So to be able to rise above that is something really special. And then there's a quote from Lori's first book, Faith, Doubts, and God's Mysterious Timing. It says, What you see happen during your life is not all that happens because of your life. What, if anything, would change in your life if you truly lived in the light of eternity? Going pretty deep on these questions this week. Mm-hmm.
I've talked about trials build us up. But do you think all Job's trials was to build him up, or do you think part of that was for us to see the example? Sometimes maybe our trials are to be an example for somebody else.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think Job's story is of more or less, it was more of an example of.
Job and Lot both.
Mm-hmm.
They suffered not only to make themselves a better person, they suffered so we can learn how to be a better person.
And I think we all can take bits and pieces of our story that somebody could see and use or help. I think that's part of what we're supposed to do with our own ministries is be able to use our life as an example to other people. So anyone else have any other thoughts on the video tonight or me singing? Hopefully that doesn't mean less people will show up on Easter. My Christmas song is still on Facebook, Kendall. You can find it. If you want a little taste of what I'm capable of, you can find it. All right. Well, we don't have anything else. I appreciate everyone coming, everyone watching online. I'm going to shut the stream off and we'll go up and pray.